Hello everybody, today we're going to be talking about how does the virus life cycle connect to the central dogma. In order to understand how viruses connect to the central dogma, it's first fundamental to understand what the central dogma is. In 1958, Francis Crick was the first person to discover this concept. He said that the central dogma is how genetic information can be utilized to create useful and workable components that cells need to survive and reproduce. The central dogma functions as a flowchart that starts with DNA, which continues to make RNA, and then RNA is able to form proteins following that. Transcription is the process of DNA being transcribed to RNA, then following that, RNA can be made into proteins by the process of translation. Now that you have a general understanding of what the central dogma is, we can use that knowledge to connect it to the virus life cycle when they infect host cells, like humans. Viruses are small particles that typically contain a coating of protein protection that surrounds genetic material. When they infect cells, they are able to inject the genetic material, which for simplicity's sake for now, we will say it's only DNA. Once the DNA is within the host cell, it can use the host cell's resources and undergo transcription to make RNA, which then can undergo translation to make more of the protein coating and DNA replication. This then allows for the assembly of a whole new virus. However, it isn't always this simple. As mentioned earlier, there's genetic material inside the viruses. This genetic material is not just DNA, but there are also RNA viruses, meaning that the genetic material in these viruses come from RNA. So when these RNA viruses infect cells, they will undergo a reverse transcription step of central dogma and make DNA from RNA. Another complication of the central dogma in viruses is when the viruses go against the central dogma. Some viruses will use a special enzyme called reverse transcriptase, which will allow the use of RNA to transcribe DNA, as shown in step 1 here. They then use this DNA to make RNA, as shown in step 2, and then following this, proteins can be made in step 3. This allows for the assembly of a new virus through the production of proteins and the new genetic material. This is an example of how the idea of the central dogma is violated, which is something Francis Crick did not know when concocting his fundamental theory. Therefore, the virus life cycle is one that is simple yet extremely complex. It closely follows the idea of the central dogma, but with a few key exceptions. This is just a quick overview of some of the general topics involving viruses and their connection to the central dogma. Thank you for listening.